My name is Nancy Frey, and I'm going to present the talk that I gave to the Confraternity of St James in London on January 28th, 2017. And I had been asked by the Confraternity to give the keynote address about my 25 years on the Camino. And it was with great pleasure that I was able to talk about the changes that I've witnessed over the years. And my primary focus in the talk was my research that I've been conducting for the last 8. And that research focuses on the relationship and the incorporation of new media technology into the Camino and the experience of being a pilgrim. Since the talk wasn't filmed at the time in London, I wanted to make this work accessible to others. So I hope that you enjoy this. And if you have any feedback, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you. In a way, this feels like a coming home. In January 1995, I came to London to attend the annual general meeting and other practical pilgrim sessions as part of my anthropological research into the late 20th century rise of the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage. I felt at the time and continue to feel very grateful to the Confraternity of St James and its members who generously welcomed me here years ago and opened their doors and minds to my research into the Camino. Howard, Marion, Allison, William, Laurie, the Foxes, James. Little did I know what a lasting impression these pilgrims and the thousands of pilgrims I've met since then would have on my heart and psyche. So thank you for inviting me back here all these years later. Some of you may know who I am, but others probably will not, and you may wonder why I was asked to talk about 25 years on the Camino. My first direct contact with the Camino was in 1992. As a doctoral student in cultural anthropology at UC Berkeley, I was in Spain looking for the topic of my dissertation. I reached Santiago in July at the height of the Feast of St. James. I saw pilgrims arriving into the Plaza de Obradoiro with their packs and their scallop shells. In stark contrast to other Catholic pilgrimage sites such as Lourdes, the suffering body was not in evidence. In fact, many of these Santiago pilgrims glowed or looked as if they had been through a powerful physical and mental journey. I sensed almost instantly that I had found my project. That is, to understand the modern resurgence of this grand medieval pilgrimage. To learn about the pilgrimage, I knew that I would have to both study its history and participate in it as a pilgrim. Consequently, I got my boots, and in 1993, I walked from Somport in France to Compostela over 6 weeks. Initially, it was an academic exercise, but the pilgrimage ended up leaving a deep and lasting impression on me that continues to today. In 1994-95, I returned to Spain to conduct my field research and worked at 6 different pilgrimage refuges, or albergues, including a memorable stint at Rabanal del Camino in July 1995, which I repeated in 1997. I lived in Compostela, traveled and walked parts of many different caminos, and visited pilgrims in their homes to do follow-up research and interviews in England, Spain, and Germany. The outcome of my research was my book Pilgrim Stories, On and Off the Road to Santiago. The Camino gave me many gifts, some very unexpected, and ultimately changed my anticipated life course. In 1997, I cycled the Camino again from Roncesvalles to take photos for my book with a pilgrim I had met during my research and who became my life partner. In 1998, he and I led 6 students from Roncesvalles walking the Camino and leading an academic course. Since then, we have worked together teaching and guiding people from around the world about Spain and the Camino. Consequently, it's been my remarkable fortune to have walked on the Camino several times a year for the last 17 years, meeting pilgrims, hearing their stories, watching their journeys. People sometimes ask me if I get tired of being on the Camino. I can honestly say that no. For me, it's always a landscape of discovery and a privilege to share in someone's potentially transformative journey. This leads to my current research. For many years, I didn't think the Camino had changed very much beyond expanding numbers and progressively increasing infrastructure. It was around 2006 that I started to notice changes. At first, the change was slow and subtle, and then it became progressively more rapid. For me, the most profound change on the Camino since the publication of Pilgrim Stories is the incorporation of new media technology into the Camino on the level of infrastructure, planning, contact, and on the experience of being a pilgrim. Marian Marpels contacted me to speak at the annual general meeting, and she suggested it would be interesting to hear, in her words, an overview from your perspective of the current state of the Camino and the changes since Pilgrim Stories was published. So before I address changes wrought during the internet age, I wanted to give a brief trip down memory lane of a few changes that I've witnessed in the Camino over the last 25 years. This is a very general overview and by no means an exhaustive list. To prepare and illustrate the talk, I had many old slides and negatives digitized from 1993 to 1997 that I took during my research years. Now, one caveat about change. I'm very aware that the Camino has been in a constant state of flux and change at every point in its development since Pelayo supposedly first saw that star in the woods over Libradon in the 9th century AD. Many people yearn for the vague medieval experience, but the Camino never is what it was. One constant I have heard repeatedly over years is people typically think the Camino was better when they did it, which of course is a perfectly valid sentiment. It probably was better precisely because it was their first time, and there's nothing like the first time. The Camino will continue to evolve and change, a reflection of our times, values, resources, and psyches. It simply is what it is now. Now I'm going to move on to some of the statistics. I thought it might be interesting to start out with some comparison from the way the Camino was in my book in the mid-1990s and in 2015. The 2016 year statistics still had not been compiled when I wrote the talk by the Pilgrim's office in Santiago. Now, statistics are a sticky issue on the Camino. The only consistent records are those maintained by the Pilgrim's office in Santiago. And these statistics only reflect the pilgrims who apply for the Compostela certificate and consequently miss many, many other people who are on the Camino. Nonetheless, they are the best available because they are the most consistent over time. So, numbers. You can see from the general perspective. In 1996, there were 23,218 pilgrims who got the Compostela. In 2015, we have increased to 262,516. So the Camino's popularity as an international destination continues to grow. Excluding the holy years, the Camino's growth steadily increases with no end in sight. We are still waiting to reach an apex, a period where 1 year was less than the previous year. Of course, the blips of the holy year don't count. It's just a continuous rise. Now, the battle of the sexes here. Back in the 90s, you had more men than women, 65% men, 35% women. And in 2015, men have decreased and women are on the rise. So this has become increasingly more equal with both men and women participating. The next category is internationalization. In 1994, I documented from the statistics 33 nationalities. In 1996, 64 nationalities, just in those couple years. And by 2015, 153 nationalities. So the Camino continues to attract travelers from far-flung places in ever-increasing numbers. Now, within those, the top 5 nationalities have also have changed. It's gone from being more of a European phenomena to an international phenomena. In 1996, Spain accounted for 70% of all of the pilgrims. And then after that were France, Germany, Holland, and Belgium. Then in 2015, Spain is no longer the above 50%, it's 46.6%, but still the majority of pilgrims are Spanish. And after that, it becomes Italy, Germany, USA, Portugal, and just going down the ranks, France is number 6, UK number 7, And interestingly, South Koreans come in at number 10. Whereas there were virtually no South Koreans in the 1990s, now they're the number 10 group by 2015. Now, how do people go? Mode of travel. In 1996, 71% walked versus 28% who cycled. And in 2015, the numbers of walkers have increased. It's 90% and 9.6, almost 10% who cycle. Cyclists were always in the minority, but their numbers are waning as this mental shift has occurred that this is a walking route. This is a issue over the years, the conflicts between walkers and cyclists, and you can see how that is change in the perception is of this as a walking Camino. Now the roads traveled, where have people been walking along these ways? Now this has been a big difference too. In 96, I don't even have specific data. The Camino Francés was the major focus of where people walked, the vast majority. And 2004, I do have a statistic that the Camino Francés, there was 77%, and the Portuguese way was 8%. Now by 2015, the Camino Francés are 65.6%, Portuguese 16.4%, and Norte 6%. So as the numbers have increased, and if people have been attracted to the Camino, they want to return to the Camino, and they want to try new Caminos, and also to take some of the pressure off of that Camino Francés. Many different routes have been expanded. Next change has to do with the acquisition of the Compostela certificate. Now, I debated about whether or not to bring up changes related to the Compostela certificate, as this is another sticky subject among the Pilgrim, within the Pilgrim community. And it often degenerates into non-productive and heated discussions about authentic and real pilgrims, and could be an entire presentation on its own. Nonetheless, I would like to make a general observation. As the pilgrimage unfolded in the 20th century, getting the Compostela certificate was most often a very meaningful memento, but not necessarily the objective of one's Camino. As the Camino has grown in popularity worldwide and gets regularly listed as one of the world's great walks, the idea has grown that one of the principal objectives of the Camino is to walk the last 100 kilometers to get the certificate. This focus has heightened conflicts among some pilgrims who believe that long-distance pilgrimages are innately better than short pilgrimages, and that the form of the pilgrimage, that is the distance, where you start, what you carry, is more important than the content, or that those two are equal. Even though clearly inner miles that are walked cannot be judged by superficial criteria of form, they regularly are by longer distance pilgrims who disdain the 100-kilometer pilgrims. I do not have time here to discuss this in depth, but at least two of the consequences have been: one, the increase in numbers and demand to walk the last 100 kilometers, especially from Sarria, putting a lot of pressure on that section; and two, the cathedral's decision to incorporate a certificate of distance in 2014 to capitulate to the ego needs of long-distance walkers who place more emphasis on form than content in the pilgrimage experience. As one man wrote on a Pilgrim forum when the decision was announced, quote, "My wife, who walked only from Sarria, said I should get a different one since I started in SJPP, that is, Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. The goal of the Camino becomes the pride and the certificate, and reinforces a competitive model of pilgrimage." Motivations and expectations. Now, to get the Compostela certificate at the Pilgrim's office, you need to state your motive, because it is supposed to be given only to religiously motivated pilgrims. The Church has progressively become more lenient in how it defines religious over the years. In my book, I recount two controversial cases that would never occur today. One was a spiritually oriented Japanese Buddhist who was denied the Compostela, and the other was a Protestant man who was grieving for his son and finally given the Compostela after a lengthy interview with the director of the Pilgrim's office, Don Jaime. In the 1990s, the Pilgrim's Office accepted the following religious motives: A, spiritual, B, religious, and C, religious cultural. On the Pilgrim's Office website in 2017, the motives have evolved to, quote, make the pilgrimage for religious or spiritual reasons, or at least an attitude of search. The religious cultural motive no longer exists, and the vaguer search has been incorporated to attend to the vast array of people who now find themselves on the Camino. In April 2015, I conducted a survey with follow-up interviews about tech and the contemporary pilgrimage experience at the Pilgrim's Office in Santiago de Compostela. I was very surprised by the results. In my survey pool of 51 people, and it was representative of the pilgrims who were arriving that day, age, nationality, sex, etc., not a single person indicated that culture or history motivated their journey. Rather, the new primary motivation was, quote, experience, i.e., having the experience or wanting a new experience. As a world walk, the Camino is now a bucket list trip for many people who want to have and share the experience. Personal reasons, including a timeout, was the other major motivation category among the pilgrims in the survey group, and gets more to this idea of an inner journey with self-reflection, which was a very common motivation in the 1990s. Now, on the level of infrastructure, with the increase in pilgrimage, there has been a huge increase in pilgrimage-based services. The growth of private albergues with a standard fee has completely outmoded the donation-based model started in the early 1990s, loosely following the tradition of monastic hospitality for pilgrims and the poor. Small towns that did not have any or very few services in the 1990s now have hopping pilgrimage-based economies, such as Moratinos, Hornillos del Camino, Rabanal del Camino. Also, there's more competition between these services vying for pilgrims' attention and increased commercialization. Signs on the edge of villages to advertise albergues are increasingly common. The woman who first opened the first pilgrimage refuge in 1990 in Hornillos del Camino found herself criticized in 2010 by albergue owners in Fromista who thought that her donation-based refuge would be unfair competition. Also, sections of the Camino have been destroyed or continuously improved, and it gets progressively more difficult to get muddy boots. Increased growth has also brought increased regulation of activities linked with the pilgrimage, meaning more red tape, bureaucracy, and licenses. Good Samaritans like the Englishman John, the pilgrim helper, who offered free pilgrim attention out of his mobile refuge, as he called it, found himself no longer welcome at the Sierra del Perdón one year because he needed a license as his free services competed with the local vendor who had set up shop. And here are some images of John in generously giving out his charity for others. Now, equipment. Pilgrims in the 1990s were pretty low tech and come as you are, as you can see in these photos above. The current high-tech pilgrims weigh all the objects in their packs by the ounce, carry super light, quick dry, UVA protected clothes, and oftentimes carry physiotape instead of duct tape. In the same vein, in the 1990s, pilgrims often found their walking sticks, preferably hazelnut, early in their walk. The stick would become a companion and sometimes carved, becoming a special map of the journey. Pilgrims still carry sticks, wooden walking sticks, but walking poles predominate. Now, it's part of a larger societal trend that public spaces are open for publicity with advertisers who are constantly vying for our attention. This is the invasion of our attentional space. And this occurs on the Camino as well. Now, anybody with a cause, an albergue, or other business creates a sticker to plaster on open spaces to try and grab your attention. Now, since 2012, there has been also a big increase in graffiti. Well, there's always been graffiti, but it has increased and changed on way markers, especially in Galicia. If you look at this image, you can see that I have this panel that people have decided to put graffiti on. And it's, if you look at the location of it, it's in Navarra and next to a chapel, a space, a green open space. And it's kind of funny if you read it. In addition to the typical Izzy was here and I love Pepe, you can also see ads, web addresses, Pilgrim hashtags, and even a commentary on the popular mobile phone game called Pokemon Go. Now, reading the comments about that, on the lower left-hand corner, it says, "Playing Pokemon Go on this trip, LOL." Lots of laughs. And he writes, "Gotta catch 'em all." And then somebody else writes, "I'm 29 and I totally agree." And someone else writes, "Pokemon Go is awesome." Now, interestingly, you know, the point of Pokemon Go is to be looking for, it keeps your attention on your phone and you're looking for these creatures. So you're looking down on your phone instead of looking up in nature. So this is just an example of that incorporation. Now shifting, now the cathedral has experienced many changes over the years. And just one of them is that due to the rise of Muslim terrorism, security measures changed significantly. And no longer are pilgrim backpacks piled up on the columns anymore. In fact, you can't even bring backpacks into the cathedral anymore. So this is a big major change. Now the last change that I'm going to mention before I get on to the focus of my research is on dogs. Now the fear of wild dogs and dogs in general was very real in the 1990s and even into the earliest 20th century. Nowadays, from the dog's point of view, pilgrims have gone from being strangers, something to bark at, to familiars, a normal part of the landscape. Dogs on the Camino Francés are now bored by pilgrims, and the sound of passing sticks puts them to sleep. The taming of the Camino dogs is a wonderful metaphor for the progressive domestication of the Camino over the years. To compare the Camino from a pre-internet time to the internet age, or the information age, as it's oftentimes called, I'm using the year 2000 as a rough cutoff. Now, even though internet technologies were used on the Camino pre-2000, their use in the Camino pilgrimage experience was significantly more limited and thereby less impacting. And I would like to make just a general comment about observation about tech. Technology, and by that I mean, in this case, social media, mobile phones, apps, the internet, etc. It is a tool. Understood as a tool, technology is inherently neither good nor bad. But in this case, neither is it neutral. Many products are specifically designed to keep the mind engaged and users coming back for more. My research on the influence that media tech has on the Camino and pilgrims is not a judgment of whether it is good or bad. My role as an anthropologist is to make evident our implicit assumptions and how these guide our actions in ways we may not be aware of. Each person needs to come to their own conclusions on the role that they want tech to play in their experiences when they're on the Camino. Now, I understand pilgrimage as a process. And in Pilgrim Stories, I gave the structures of the book to follow the idea of the pilgrimage as a rite of passage. Underlying all rites of passage is a basic 3-step sequence of movement. Separation, the limen, in this case that's the journey along the Camino, and the return home. No matter what the motivation, the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage follows the same pattern. The individual leaves the familiarity of home, begins a new identity as an anonymous pilgrim, and is often outside of one's comfort zone. The change in the external conditions can be both destabilizing and disorienting. And this stimulates potentially internal changes, which leads to insight and reflection. The final stage is the return to daily life, somehow different than before one began. In the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage, both the physical and mental elements of this process, working in tandem, are highly salient. While the physical component has remained relatively the same, for most people, the mental component has changed dramatically in the internet age. Over the last 15 years, I've witnessed the progressive disruption of this three-stage process. The internet age has brought a new layer of experience, the cyber, the virtual Camino, and potentially increased mental activity that did not exist before, neither as a reality nor as a perceived need. Also, as media tech becomes habitual in the Camino, the boundaries between these different stages blur as people move in and out of them on the mental plane, ultimately impacting the power of the overall experience. Now, I have to take a brief pause to explain my diagram here. I wish I was a better artist, but if you can see, I wanted to create a visual impression of what I am talking about. You can see pre-internet how there are very few lines. The pilgrim is there in the center, and his mind is virtually disconnected. There aren't lines going to a cloud, going back and forth. He just has a few occasional connections. Now, in the internet age, you can see that the pilgrim has a very different mental relationship with the world. Before the Camino, during the Camino, after the Camino, there is this connectivity on that mental plane. And this is a huge difference. And now I'm going to explain how that unfolds. Now, the before in the internet age. Feeling anxiety before launching oneself into the unknown is a normal and universal human emotion. One way that people deal with anxiety, as well as to heighten potential enjoyment and success of the encounter with the unknown, is to prepare, both physically and mentally. Before the rise of the internet, preparation was mostly limited to books, articles, word of mouth, pilgrimage preparation talks, and the like. With the birth of new forms of human communication, such as websites, blogging, vlogging, text messaging, online forums, and social media groups, the internet provides an easily accessible goldmine of information that now permits the potential and the armchair pilgrim worldwide to find and get answers to any question they might have. If someone can't find the answer through already established written sources on the web, questions can be directed to online Camino de Santiago forums, news groups, and websites specifically dedicated to helping potential pilgrims develop and plan their journeys. It's also brought a lot of people who never would have made it to the Camino a reality instead of just a possibility. While the wealth of resources has numerous benefits, pilgrims also experience drawbacks related to too much information. Potential pilgrims can get bogged down in the minutiae, feel overwhelmed by the quantity, confused by conflicting info, and not be clear on when enough is enough. When scanning through forums and Facebook pages to see what kinds of concerns potential pilgrims have, popular topics include raincoat versus poncho, toilet etiquette in albergues, is it difficult to make friends on the Camino, and 30 do's and don'ts for newbies. In fact, instead of diminishing anxiety, the information overload can prey on people's fears and increase anxiety, leading some people to cut off their forum connections before going. As one 20-something male wrote, quote, "I leave next Tuesday and I've decided to stop reading the forum now as it's mostly just worrying me. Every day I'm reading how there are no beds. Every day I'm reading that you can't walk your own Camino because you need to plan for the people who get up at 5 a.m. or only walk 15 kilometers and are taking all the beds by midday. I keep on reading about people not acting in the spirit of the Camino. I just want to get there now, as my amazing journey is starting to seem a little less. Hopefully, a break from the forum will allow my preconceptions to equalize again and allow me to regain my excitement. Rant over." That was written in 2013. Now, the perception of how difficult it is to prepare for the Camino has progressively increased over the years. And you can see this in the evolution of Camino guidebooks. For example, the first modern guidebooks to the Camino de Santiago, written by Don Elias Valinia in 1985, and then published in English in 1992, contains one page of commonsensical preparation advice called Getting Your Bearings. Over the years, guidebook introductions progressively got longer and longer, leading in 2011 to the birth of a new genre of guidebook, solely devoted to helping you prepare to do the Camino. Ironically, as the Camino has progressively and objectively become easier to plan, organize, and do, with increased information sources available from the comfort of home, efficient waymarking, and increased on-the-ground services readily available, people now flounder in the morass of information and may need a guidebook to pull themselves free of it. Do you objectively need more help to do the Camino in 2016 than you did in the 1990s? Or have we made it more complicated than it is? Another new facet of pilgrimage in the internet age is the development of one's virtual pilgrim identity and participation in real time in other people's Camino experiences before even setting foot on the Camino, through participation in online Camino forums, Facebook groups, and the like. In 2008, I began to follow forum threads and noticed that potential pilgrims began to start threads and identify themselves in jest as part of the class of 2008. Forum engagement can span days, months, or even years before going. Some potential forum pilgrims post hundreds of comments before they ever set foot on the Camino and engage actively with other first-time pilgrims, veteran posters, and on-the-road pilgrims who connect to the forum from the Camino to check in or ask questions. The boundaries between the three stages of pilgrimage blur significantly as the future virtual pilgrim enters the live Camino via the virtual Camino. Virtual pilgrims create memories about places and form impressions of people, landscapes, and experiences before setting foot into them. How does this impact the real on-the-ground experience once the virtual pilgrim is literally on the Camino, in terms of expectations and attitudes about what their Camino should or ought to be? I'm not advocating not preparing, but rather encourage potential pilgrims to use common sense and reflect on the impact of being hyper-informed. Discovery, wonder, and surprise are elements often traditionally sought after in such a journey into the unknown, like the Camino, and can be impacted by extensive pre-activity and engagement. Packing lists have evolved significantly since the 1990s. Now, in 2017, the vast majority of pilgrims carry a mobile communication device. That is a smartphone, iPhone, tablet, prepaid phones with Spanish SIMs, etc. And will upload a Camino app as a guidebook, reference, connection point, and the like. In Pilgrim Stories, I made reference to one man with a mobile phone on the Camino that I encountered. He was an oddity. As our world has evolved over the last 25 years, the desire to connect to virtually both in and outside the Camino has progressively increased. I've also watched the evolution of forum conversations regarding tech, going from, should I take mobile tech, to what mobile tech should I take? These themes often overlapped, and the topics generally created heated debate between the self-defined techno-geeks and the purists regarding the virtues and disadvantages of tech on the Camino. By 2014-15, the bulk of questions revolve around the technical aspects and practicalities rather than questioning the role tech might have in one's journey, even though these voices are still there. Now here's a list of tech-related items potentially on your packing list, taken from a sample of thousands of Camino packing lists online and the photo that accompanied this blog entry. The author begins with a comment, quote, "When it came to tech, I wanted to take as little as possible to both remain in the moment and keep the weight down. On his list, made in 2015, he includes a 4-way USB charger, sports watch, portable battery, smartphone as a camera, communication device, and with an uploaded guidebook app, cables, and noise isolating earphones. He mentioned the sports watch that he uses to monitor his Camino. It's progressively more common for people to monitor their journeys and bodies with Fitbits and other wearable devices to track the number of daily steps, your pace, your distance, your heart rate, your calories consumed, your start and stop times, and even your water consumption. To keep their tech charged, some people bring their own solar panels attached to their backpacks. That's the end of the section on the preparation, and this is the outcomes of that preparation. So as a result of the preparation, some people do make better choices for themselves, but it's readily apparent that many 21st century pilgrims still experience the same problems, both physical and preparation-wise, they did in the 1990s, despite all that information that's available. It turns out that the fumbling, the making of mistakes, and dealing with the problems or adversities of the Camino are actually an important part of the pilgrimage process that one goes through to gain insight and reduce one's mental weights. Reading about it online or in a book is clearly not enough. For example, reducing the bag, i.e., really realizing you don't need everything you brought and letting some of it go, is often an important mental and physical step towards discovering the power of simplicity. Shedding the physical weight in the bag often then leads to the subsequent realization and the comparison to one's daily life. My life is cluttered and materialistic. There is a lot I can let go of. In the Camino, I feel so good and have so little. By 2017, most pilgrims carry a mobile device as a minimum on the Camino, but there is a considerable spectrum of usage and level of connectivity. Generally, people who are more connected at home will also be more connected on the Camino unless they make specific conscious decisions regarding tech usage. And likewise, someone who is less connected in daily life will probably tend to be less connected in the Camino. Some people are aware that tech habits might interfere in the process of pilgrimage as a meditative activity and make choices to be less connected. Many are not aware, especially among the younger generation that grew up in a connected world, and may have never experienced sustained disconnection in their lives. Others simply embrace technology and revel in all the ways they can remain connected, monitor and share their pilgrimages, and keep their normal channels open and daily life activities up to date. For many, tech connectivity will seem like a non-issue. One pilgrim described in a 2016 article his surprise and how attitudes had changed on the Camino since his first pilgrimage in 2017. He wrote, "Behavior that is acceptable in public today, such as posing for selfies, constantly checking email, posting and texting in meetings and in class and in almost any social situation with friends and family, would have seemed odd, perhaps even rude back then. But things have changed." Now, one of the major changes is our experience of time and the incorporation of tech time in the Camino. In the 1990s, when you left home, you experienced a bracketed period of time away, where there was a significant mental and physical disconnection from home and the world imposed by the tech-limited circumstances that existed pre-internet. Studies show that nature has a calming effect on the human mind, and walking is also a meditative act which has calming effects and therapeutic effects on the psyche. You find yourself grounded intensely in the present, in the here and now. In the past, it was hard to escape this unless you chose to leave the Camino. The simplified day consisted of getting up, packing the bag, eating, finding the arrows, and walking, mostly in nature. The combination of enforced, reduced mental activity, the therapeutic and meditative powers of walking, and the calming effect of nature led typically to a profound change in the pilgrim's sense of time and place. Now, people often carry a layer of stress in their daily lives. A layer of stress, it's like a cork. Reducing the mental responsibilities, activities, and stress in the Camino, pre-internet, allowed the release of that cork. As the cork popped, unanticipated, unforced, and often confusing upwellings of emotion and memories poured forth from the pilgrim. Pilgrims wrote in diaries and occasionally chatted with family, but these experiences built up inside of the pilgrim, had to be dealt with in the moment, became layered and mulled over, forming a large whole within that bracketed time away. Often it was not until the return that the pilgrim was able to begin to process the events and experiences of the journey. In the internet age, the power of the physical journey, the walking and the calming effect of nature, remain clearly present, but the mental journey is significantly altered. People still face adversity through blisters, pains, and the day-to-day trials that arise. Pain helps anchor pilgrims to the here and now. But tech usage helps keep the cork of stress in place rather than remove it, making it more difficult to access those inner worlds. Your mind is kept engaged and distracted with status updates, notifications, taking photos and selfies, checking and posting social media, body and journey monitoring, online bill paying, checking the news, informing your family and friends, writing a blog, working, reading reviews of albergues, making reservations for the next day, checking your online dating site, or resolving any kind of problem mediated by your phone. Rather than getting out of your comfort zone, it's much easier to stay in it. Instead of a global, bracketed time away mentally and physically in a unique place and space, internet age pilgrims progressively tend to have a fragmented experience where their bodies are physically in their Camino, but their minds are often switch tasking between different virtual realities disassociated from the Camino at hand. Rather than being in the Camino, people seem to want to constantly get out of it. It's harder and harder for people simply to be content and be where they are. Now, mobile tech pilgrims have new needs and new neediness. One day, as I was doing research, I was walking into San Juan de Ortega, and I came across a gentleman that was a member of a forum, and I decided to start to talk to him about his experiences. And we had a really interesting conversation, and I told him about my research and what I was doing. And towards the end of this conversation, he realized that I had been involved in the Camino for a while, and he said to me, "Now look," he said, "if you have a voice that could have a say in getting this fixed, what the Camino needs is better bandwidth, a larger Wi-Fi zone, and more outlets to charge devices." Now, this is a man who's 72 years old. This is not a 16-year-old guy. This is somebody who has lived pre- and post-internet, and is a good example of the perception of new needs in the Camino. In the 1990s, there was little to no perception that a pilgrim needed a mobile device to do the Camino. Now, in 2017, there's a very high perception that it is necessary to have a phone, and that doing so will improve your Camino experience. Not only that, for some people, it's even irresponsible not to carry a phone. The usual reasons given are safety, information, contact with family, and convenience. The presence of mobile tech and the demand for it has created a new layer of needs for the pilgrim. The question in the 1990s for the needy pilgrim when entering an albergue was, Do you have hot water? And then it became, do you have a washing machine? From roughly 2010 and beyond, it became, is there Wi-Fi? As more and more accommodations have Wi-Fi, up to 90% as reported by one pilgrim in 2015, it's less of a question than a given. The new question is simply, what's the password? Or if there is no Wi-Fi, some pilgrims will simply move on to the next albergue. This new need for connectivity also reinforces a layer of necessary end-of-the-day activities, tech activities for the pilgrim, which requires significant mental engagement and distraction. It's now an invisible weight people are unaware they are carrying, but that increases one's mental baggage substantially, depending on how one uses it. Also, giving people everything they want doesn't necessarily make them more happy. It tends to simply make them more needy and demanding. As this technology became more accessible in bars, albergues, and places where pilgrims gather, people end up spending more time connecting. Now, when you stop at a bar or cafe, pilgrims habitually take out phones. When you finish walking, settle into the accommodation, and tend to mundane activities like the wash, the new normal is to have some tech time. In addition to the activities I mentioned above, people also spend their free time in the albergues using their phones to play games, watch movies, read books, read and respond to threads on a Camino forum or a Facebook group, Skype a loved one. How much time people spend online varies considerably, but it is a reality for most to spend some time each day. Pilgrims also learn from each other and do what others do. Some people have personal rules to manage their technology. One woman explained that she created for herself a switch-off zone when she turned off her phone and then she walked. The rest of the day is still in the Camino, but it's okay to be tech connected. In general, it's common now to have reduced mental activity when walking and then increased mental activity during breaks and the end of the day. Now, the ease of social relations and community building, one's Camino family, as it's now called, continues to be highly valued among Santiago pilgrims. How people develop and maintain bonds, though, has undergone changes in the internet. Now, an interesting observation about cyclists. Now, cyclists used to be like the Pony Express on the Camino. They've lost this saddle. They used to connect waylaid walkers and lost loves, but it's no longer necessary because people usually just connect through text messages or WhatsApp or some other convenient way, and they no longer need a faster moving pilgrim like a cyclist to connect missed people. Internet age pilgrims continue to randomly meet up, form groups, and may or may not share contact info. The increased numbers of walkers and accommodations means that it's harder to always run into the same people. When contact info is shared, it's often a mobile phone number, WhatsApp, or Facebook account, and maybe an email address for the older crowd. To contact another pilgrim, texting is common, and meeting up has become much easier. Depending on the information shared, one's anonymity, highly valued in the pre-internet, is potentially reduced because anyone can access who you are through an internet search. Now, internet age pilgrims' tech time practices increasingly impact the social aspect of the Camino. Pilgrims are less likely to reach out to others if their social and emotional needs are being met through the device and their virtual connections. In the afternoon and evening, due to bandwidth limitations in albergues, pilgrims often gather around the Wi-Fi zone to connect and have their tech time. Pilgrims are increasingly alone together, borrowing from sociologist Sherry Turkle's work. One longtime hospitalera in the Meseta explained in 2015 how Wi-Fi worked in her albergue in the Meseta. Sometimes she would forget to turn on the Wi-Fi in the morning and people would ask her to do so. She commented, "They get agitated if they can't get online." She also shared with me that as an innkeeper, it's great because Wi-Fi is like sweets for kids, a pacifier. She explained that if she wanted some peace and quiet, I just give everybody the password and then they all hook up and they get looking at their own individual screens contentedly. Potential bonding experiences are missed if you are busy doing something else. Going back to pilgrimage as a rite of passage, leaving home entailed a physical and mental break and a transition between the familiar to the unknown. There was an implicit mutual understanding between home and the traveler that communication would be very limited, irregular, and mostly one way, initiated by the pilgrim. Both home and the traveler, or the pilgrim, accepted these limitations with some exceptions, phone call here or there, letters, as a normal and often difficult part of going away and being left. Leaving might also be a tremendous relief, coupled with excitement of going on an anticipated journey with new adventures awaiting. There had to be a basic trust and letting go on both sides. In the internet age, the pilgrim's relationship to home is radically transformed on the mental level. Physically, the pilgrim leaves, but typically maintains a more heightened mental proximity to home and the world in general. One common reason given for carrying tech is to allay fears, report back, and keep in touch with loved ones. Quote unquote, worry from home projected onto the pilgrim increases the sense for the traveler to need to be connected. It also gives the pilgrim the sense of being on call. I need to be available even though I'm away. Pilgrims also want to share their experiences or know about home. That need to constantly reinforce home that all is okay is a shift in our attitudes regarding separation and travel. The old adage, no news is good news, appears less and less relevant, suggesting that our contemporary virtual relationships have a greater fragility and they need constant, often public, reinforcement. In addition, pilgrims now receive constant feedback about their experiences from friends, loved ones, and potentially unknown audience members if they're writing a public blog. Here, once again, we see the blurring between the different phases of pilgrimage. People often experienced a tremendous sense of freedom by going on the Camino. You could be a different person and experience new and different things without judgment or ties or worry about what home might think. If you're constantly reporting back, you may inhibit yourself from experimenting with self and others. While the sharing can be and feel very positive and uplifting, it can also end up being self-limiting. The sense of missing and longing for loved ones when far away can be an important step in realizing their value to you. Pilgrims appear more independent, but actually become more isolated from their on-the-ground community and more dependent on their phone and virtual community to resolve crises. Connection can provide tremendous support for a pilgrim, especially when feeling down, tired, insecure, or lonely. The temptation and the ease with which you can resolve those negative feelings through a phone reduces the need for the pilgrim to look within to find a solution, or look around to fellow companions or circumstances. People now experience what I call collaborative pilgrimages, where they never really separate emotionally and mentally from a larger audience, with their experiences entangled on the mental plane, losing real independence in the process. Curiously, what was a normal pilgrimage in the 1990s is now called a digital detox, when someone chooses consciously not to use or bring a mobile phone on the Camino. This type of pilgrimage is rare and considered radical, extreme, and even medieval. My research includes an in-depth interview and correspondence with a Swedish woman who did digital detox pilgrimages in 2006, 2013, and 2014. One difference between the 1990s and now is that the highly tech-connected mind needs time to settle down and resists disconnection as the brain is accustomed to continuous activity and stimuli. When someone with a high level of connectivity in daily life chooses to not use mobile tech on the Camino, they can experience withdrawal symptoms, such as phantom ringing and vibration for days, and it can take more than a week for the mind to slow down and allow the pilgrim to start to feel the power of solitude to open their senses and deeply feel the here and now. Another pilgrim who went without tech in September 2015 reported on the digital media website Mashable that, quote, he writes, "The first days were the hardest. I felt something missing from my hands. I'm used to constantly reading emails and news on my phone, so I was anxious. In restaurants, I could not get used to not having my phone on the table. Everyone else connected to the internet, and I felt ignored. I'd go to the restroom or check my backpack instead." We expect now to be busy all the time, to have our hands and heads occupied and doing something. For many people, their phone is their third appendage. We take these same daily life practices unreflectively into the Camino and suggest that we don't know how to be with ourselves without our tech. Camilla, the Swedish detox pilgrim that I interviewed, told me in a 2015 interview. She summed it up like this, quote, "When people are bringing computers and iPads, they are making it very difficult for themselves to actually get at what I consider to be the real experience. I'm surprised people don't see this. And my right to technology is, so much more important than to the whole Camino experience. It surprises me a lot, actually, because I'm using technology all the time in daily life. But for me, it's supernatural not to try and use it on the Camino, or at least to a minimum." End of quote. There's been a shift in pilgrims' expectations, awfully vastly differing, of what the Camino should or might be as a travel experience, a journey, and or a pilgrimage over the last 25 years. The Camino as a pilgrimage, in the traditional sense, implies both an inner and an outer journey to the sacred place. There's an understanding that it entails a step into the unknown, the wilderness of the world, but most importantly, the wilderness within. The inner places we haven't visited in a long time, or may not even know are there. A huge part of pilgrimage can be a confrontation of the self, a willingness to go down the unexplored rough paths, take risks, overcome fears, experience solitude, loneliness, and boredom, as well as confront discomfort, both mental and physical, feel discouragement, desperation, or intense joy and ecstasy. Internet age pilgrims are aware of this as a model of the Camino, but may not share it as an expectation of their journey. 21st century travelers want to connect and expect to connect. With the rapid advances in cheap, easy-to-use technology providing instant, real-time information, it's possible to control many more aspects of the day-to-day Camino experience and thereby keep oneself from feeling as intensely. Tech usage can have a numbing quality on both positive and negative emotions. Mobile devices, headphones, tablets, etc. can help us keep distance from ourselves and others, as well as potentially uncomfortable situations we don't want to deal with. Pilgrims have gradually accepted and welcomed these changes for the most part. If you get lost, don't ask someone. Look at your GPS or call emergency services. Where to eat? Don't bother exploring the village or town or ask a villager. Just check your app for the best pilgrim recommendation or ask your virtual friends in an online forum group. Another major fear managed by tech is, for example, where to sleep. The not finding a bed fear generated a lot of anxiety among pilgrims in the 1990s and continues to be a major source of anxiety. One solution that tech and the online albergue system gives the pilgrim is to book accommodation ahead, thereby eliminating the worry of where to sleep. Rather than let the trip unfold organically and face potential adversity as it comes, the trend is to try and control the Camino experience so, quote, things don't go wrong. The old idea of trusting the road is fading away. There's a growing implicit desire to have what I call a TripAdvisor Camino, that is, one that has no glitches or problems. With our tech, we're able to bubble wrap our Camino and resolve many more points of discomfort. This is good, but it's also a double-edged sword. The pilgrimage is smoother and with fewer rough parts, but it keeps us from exploring more profoundly the wilderness within. We wind up diluting our experiences in the process. People are developing the habit of looking down rather than looking up to resolve basic problems fundamental to the pilgrimage. There is an implicit and at times irrational trust that what the machine says must be true or is more reliable than our own instincts, observations, or what we can learn in face-to-face interactions. I believe it is very important to remember that we are encouraged by the tech industry to do this. To illustrate this and end the section focused on the during stage of the Camino, I've inserted a clip of a video by a tech company that has developed a Wi-Fi app for the Camino to guarantee full-time Wi-Fi connectivity so the pilgrim can always be connected wherever and whenever. Progressively, we are outsourcing skills unthinkable just a few years ago to our phones and thereby atrophying those abilities within ourselves. The advertising for this app tells us, quote, "Do the best Camino with us. We will accompany and do the Camino with you so that it will all be much easier. We offer free Wi-Fi so that you can live your Camino connected to the internet." Our 21st century Wi-Fi connected pilgrim looks down to solve his problems, interacts with no one, as people have simply become noise around him, shares his solitary experiences with a virtual audience, and never really seems to engage beyond the phone, as Wi-Fi fulfills all his needs. Helping pilgrims now signifies giving them tech rather than helping them develop life skills. So we finally reached Santiago. Santiago is a transition point between the road and the return home, as oftentimes is Finisterre or the coast or Mochia. The Plaza de Obradoiro continues to be a powerful point of arrival and reunion point full of mixed emotions, elation, letdown, triumph, worry about the future. But now it's also very common to share this moment with the world. Now we move into the daily Pilgrim's Mass, held at noon at the main altar in the cathedral. This is a long-awaited event and an important rite of closure for many pilgrims to Santiago, even if they are not religiously motivated. An anticipated event for many people was and is the Botafumeiro censer swung at the end of the Mass on special occasions. How we now experience that moment has changed dramatically. In 1994, we witnessed a sea of people contemplating the event. In 2016, we witnessed a sea of people capturing the moment. Seeing how people experience the Botafumeiro through their devices is a good example of how our use of our phones and devices distances us from living them in the moment, not just in Santiago, but on the Camino in general. Rather than live them and feel them directly, we mediate them through our phones by taking photos to share or store for future consumption. Or we multitask our Camino and try to both live, see, and feel it, but also capture it and share it for others. Unless you focus on one or the other, it's hard to do either one fully and completely. At times, our perceived right to capture and share moments can interfere with others' enjoyment of simply being. Underlying this new trend in how we remember and is another element of how we remember and experience events. We've developed a general distrust of our memories. Memories often overworked by minds cluttered with all of our online communications. Rather than allowing oneself to simply be in the Camino, people have developed a layer of worry that I need to record it or I'll forget. I have to keep track rather than just be and trust the internal process. Now, the return home. The return tends to be the hardest stage to talk about because it's the least discussed and processed. In the 1990s, I wanted to address the return. How did the Camino continue to impact people after they were done, if at all? In Pilgrim Stories, I present the large spectrum of return experiences. My experience as a researcher on the return in the internet age has been significantly different than in the 1990s. One difference is how people respond to me. When the Camino pilgrimage was a contained whole experience and people didn't have outlets like they do, the Camino remained more internal. When I asked questions via snail mail, hard to believe but true, I would receive lengthy, deeply felt, handwritten letters. Sitting down and writing about their experiences was often therapeutic, and participants frequently expressed gratitude for the opportunity to reflect. The responses I receive now tend to be much shorter, or in some cases, non-existent. In my 2015 survey at the Pilgrim's office, the 37 participants of the 51 total who gave me email addresses ended up having a very dismal response. Only 2 responded when I did a follow-up study in 2016. Curiously, one of the 2 had consciously not taken a mobile device. There had only been 2 people within the group of 51 who did not have a mobile device. When I posted a thread about my research on the return in the digital age in 2015 on a Camino forum, I was met with hostility and suspicion from a couple of members. Some of the posts even had to be censored, something that had not occurred when I did the same in 2007 and 2011. The most in-depth and profound responses I've received in my current research are from pilgrims who chose to walk disconnected. Why might this be? One factor relates to the blurring of the stages of separation, limen, and return, and the mental proximity that is often maintained with home, causing the intensity of the separation and the return to be diminished. When one is in constant and frequent contact with home, describing the events and getting emotional comfort, there's less surprise, feeling of missing, and storing up of experiences that need to be shared. Home is also less surprised by the returnee, even if they don't really understand what the pilgrim has been through, because in a way they've been sharing photos, comments, and stories along with the pilgrim. I mention this as the collaborative pilgrimage. Another factor relates to how our communication patterns have changed over the last 10 years. On the Camino, people share events, selfies, experiences, and emotions parceled out in bits and pieces to a virtual audience who may be giving real-time feedback to the pilgrim. When the return comes, there's less need to share as the pilgrim has been processing and sharing, but in a very different way all along. Also, once back home, our connected lives simply take over and we move on to the next thing. In my 2015 tech survey, many people reported feeling less need to connect while on the Camino, and they liked connecting less, but they didn't think much would change once they got home. Social, family, and work-related communications, including emails, social media, games, and other online activities, are endless. People are so busy keeping up, it's harder to reflect and process experiences unless you make a concerted effort to do so. As the internet age advances, the evolution of motives, typically found pre-internet, appears also to lessen, and pilgrimages can be more reaffirming rather than transformative. It's now common to expect the Camino to be a, quote, great experience, and then it is. For example, in San Juan de Ortega, I met a 68-year-old woman who gave me her Camino card with her name and Camino contact info. Also printed on the card was the phrase, "It's the journey that matters in the end." She already knew before coming that it was the journey that mattered, a common Camino lesson of the 1990s. When I asked her to reflect on her Camino a year plus later, she quoted from her blog entry written soon after she completed the Camino. The message confirmed the idea on her card and reaffirmed her expectations about what she hoped it would be. It was a wonderful, reaffirming experience, but it didn't seem to challenge her to evolve to a new place within herself. The development of Camino forums, WhatsApp and Facebook groups, etc. in the internet age are a major change in the return experience. These serve as important new outlets for the return pilgrim to reconnect with other pilgrims, process the return, commiserate about the glazed over look they get from friends and family, and to help future pilgrims. The major difference between these forums and the on-the-ground associations is the lack of face-to-face contact and infinitely greater access upon demand to the community. Generally, more posting and more likes leads to greater status, and you become a veteran poster respected within the community. The tone of the forum depends greatly on the tone of the moderators and veteran posters giving to it, and this can vary tremendously depending on their level of experience, attitudes about the Camino, and the beliefs about what the Camino is or should be. But with any forum that is not face-to-face, there's also more room for hostility and breakdown of communication. For many active participants, membership is an important part of maintaining their connection to the Camino, pilgrim identity, and sense of belonging in this enormous, ever-expanding virtual pilgrim community. Now coming to my conclusions. The Camino and the pilgrims who course its ways are a reflection of the societies and worlds they come from. The world is not the same as the 1990s, and inevitably, the Camino is not either. Does this mean you can't have a profound experience on the Camino? Of course not. The important thing is to be aware of how your choices, intentionality, and way of relating to the Camino, to home, your phone, etc., influence a very important element of the journey: extended mental engagement or disengagement. People seek today mental disengagement, a time out, yet find it hard to see how the tech connectivity makes any difference to their overall experience. We seem to be progressively less aware of how these new habits keep us engaged mentally and distracted from where we are. I'm struck as I continue to read pilgrims' accounts of what they value most about the Camino and the lessons they have learned along the way. Special face-to-face encounters with others, the power of the human touch, being in nature, and the satisfaction and joy found in simplicity as we lighten our load on the Camino are the qualities of the journey that people crave and remember. Pilgrims of the 21st century are finding and cherishing these same experiences as they did in the 20th century, but now there is a tendency to buffer ourselves mentally against them via technology. Many times unwittingly, our dependence created by technology potentially isolates us from real-time experiences because we're too busy looking at our phones to be where we are and enjoy the many lessons found in silence, solitude, and struggle. People still feel good when on the Camino because it stimulates feelings of connectedness. Even if the disconnection is brief or less intense, it is positive. Pilgrims return to busy lives a little recharged and lament that real life isn't like the Camino, without realizing that you can bring life into closer alignment with the Camino through many small steps. The hazard the internet age tech pilgrim faces is resisting the temptation to fill up the gift the Camino gives, freed up mental space, with a lot of distracting noise, most of it junk food for the mind. Exploring the impact of technology on our life experiences and something as potentially profound as a pilgrimage is important. Reflecting on the choices that we make is important, and realizing that we have choices is also important. Reflecting on your usage ahead of time, the relationship you want to maintain with home and friends, will allow you to engage in different ways and bring intentionality to the Camino. And remember to look up. Thank you.